Great. Thanks so much. And thanks to everybody for coming in and being here. I wonder if as we get started, we could just go around and introduce ourselves. I'm not sure everybody knows everybody else here. I am Michael Murphy from the English department. Matt, I think you're the only person I have not met in person. And I am the Writing Across the Curriculum coordinator here and have been for a long time. So actually, Ken, you're next on my screen.
All right, sure. I'm Ken Nichols. I'm a writing fellow in the English and Creative Writing Department, and I'm part of the Writing Across the Curriculum Committee.
Thanks, Ken. Actually, and maybe Amanda, you want to say hello? Also a writing fellow?
Sure. Hi, I'm Amanda Trainum. I am also a writing fellow, and I work in the Department of English and Creative Writing. I teach English 102 and introductory literature courses.
Great. Thank you. I won't call anybody else out.
I can go ahead and go. My name is Matt McCluskey. I'm fourth year faculty in the Department of Criminal Justice. I'm a sociologist by training, and I teach a number of our writing intensive courses in the Department of Criminal Justice. We have courses designated as writing courses and others that are not. In the last couple of years, I've been teaching the senior seminar, which is very writing intensive, at least for the standards in typical forms of evaluation for our department.
Great. Thanks, Matt.
And I'm Lynn Blanchfield. Sorry I was late to the to the game here. I'm in the history department and I'm also on the Writing Across the Curriculum Committee.
Thanks.
April Altai Damkasi, English department. I teach English for academic purpose courses that support international ESOL students academically.
Great. Thanks so much to everybody. It's just useful if we have a sense going in of who we all are. Anyway, let me go ahead. Oh, and Mallory is just here. Just got here. I don't know if you're available to say hello, Mallory. We've just been sort of introducing ourselves.
Hi, everybody. I'm working and listening, so.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, let me go ahead. I just shared screen and I dropped these notes into the chat. I will try to get to this quickly because what I'd really like to do is present this document, and that may take at least a few minutes. This is a document developed by the Writing Across the Curriculum Steering Committee and the Writing Fellows. And basically, we were trying to offer some advice to faculty across campus about the use of AI and all of the kind of connected problems of AI in student writing, which really has like changed the practice of writers sort of inside and outside higher education. The Writing Fellows will remember, Ken and Amanda, that a couple of years ago we sort of were crusading from college to college. We had the sense that faculty were really confused about what AI meant, how students were using it, what other people in their fields were doing. And so we wanted to kind of have some conversations. I guess I feel like people still don't know. I think they have a better sense of AI, what AI is and how it works and what their students do with it. But I don't think they have a better sense of necessarily of how to handle it always. And I've also noticed that some faculty seem less inclined kind of to assign writing in their classes. And so, again, we felt like we wanted to produce some kind of document that might help faculty think through this. And so I guess in some ways I want to begin with the end of that document. I'll move to the document itself in a minute. But I guess I wanted to highlight this because this speaks to that question of the kind of sense of despair that it feels like I've seen some faculty members articulating. I guess one of the things that Writing Across Curriculum wanted to do was reaffirm, its kind of commitment to writing as a form of like learning and assessment. I do think that, again, some faculty members feel like discouraged about the prospects of sort of meaningful interaction with students through written language and kind of the assignment of writing. I think that, as we say here, we continue to believe that college careers in which there's less writing are college careers in which there's less thinking. I do think that writing is the one of the sort of higher forms of knowledge, the sort of integration and assimilation of knowledge. And so, again, I think it's a really important part of what we do. I think there's been a movement both toward some kind of spoken interaction. I think I've heard some people talk about, a version of what I connect with, like PhD exams, where you talk to a graduate student about, you get a kind of full sense of their absorption of a kind of topic area. And I think that's a really wonderful model. Though I think it's really difficult, as somebody, Liz Schmidt was pointing out in one of these meetings the other day, if you have like 300 students in an introductory economics course, like forget that. I think it's not an especially kind of feasible model. I've also heard some people talking about like going to blue books, and I guess not. I guess lots of people have heard that kind of discussion. I guess the Writing Across Curriculum Committee again wanted to kind of reaffirm the value of some untimed writing where students have space to think about an issue and especially kind of to revise. I think that is really fundamental. I think that this does mean, as we say in the second paragraph here, that this makes the assignment and reading of student writing a lot more complicated. And it's kind of hard to understand what a text is sort of as you get it. But again, it feels to us like it's fundamentally kind of important. Some difficulties in doing this, again, this probably won't surprise people, but there is this great kind of sense of disciplinary difference. I think people have a sense of that. People across campus, both on an individual basis, but then also by discipline, I think feel really differently about AI and the ways in which it might be used in intellectual work. I also, again, this probably won't surprise people, but I think we were thinking as we put this document together about the idea that AI is a profoundly moving target and that it won't stop. That both the technology and then students' uses of it continue to evolve pretty quickly. I have seen this, especially with the kind of student usage. I think I've seen this more clearly in the last semester or two. I think we're developing a set of students who are like AI natives. We used to talk about digital natives, but I think that we're developing the students now, went through high school with AI. And so I think they tend to use it differently sort of as writers than students 5 or 6 years ago did. So anyway, let me go to the document itself. And I'll just kind of like go through this at least as quickly as I can. And maybe I'll go back to the presentation here. Again, really what we'd like to do today is develop, find out what people are thinking about these documents. I have some questions I'd love your thoughts on. Is this a useful sort of a thing to do, produce this kind of a document? Are there pieces of it you disagree with or change? Are there questions we don't answer? Is there kind of stuff left out? And then two, if we give students this kind of general advice, right, as we have for faculty, and as the student member on the Writing Across the Curriculum Steering Committee was rightly insisting that we should develop some similar sort of a document for students. If that's the case, do you have some sense of what kinds of general things it would be good to say to students? So anyway, let me go ahead and begin. We just note at the beginning of this document that SUNY Oswego's AI guidelines, like those on most campuses, are pretty open, that faculty are encouraged. This is not the case, I think, kind of universally. And John, you could give us a better sense of that, I'm sure. But most campuses, I think, have decided that AI should be used in ways that faculty seem recognize as appropriate, and that might mean anything from totally prohibiting AI to, at moments, even kind of requiring the use of AI. We cite the academic integrity policy here, which suggests that, as well as, I think this language came from the provost's office. I've kind of forgotten. But you can take a look at local language here if you're interested in that. We in terms of writing, I guess we wanted to say that this feels like a more complex and difficult kind of a question than in other areas on campus. The courses that really incorporate writing, the question's more complicated, and there's lots more gray area in terms of what exactly an AI, a useful AI policy might be. There's this common comparison I think people have heard between as AI as a writing tool and sort of a calculator, that in some way AI could maybe revolutionize writing in ways that, calculators revolutionized work in math. And I think that holds at least in part, but only in part. I think that the uses of AI are much more complicated in writing, and it's not a sort of a mechanical calculation, that is performed by AI as a calculator does, but there's lots of kind of complicated questions. In terms of particular sorts of usage, if you use AI to brainstorm, is that okay? Are there ever circumstances where you don't want students to use AI to brainstorm? Is it ever okay to use AI generated language? Do we have some responsibility? Because students maybe will be faced with the world where AI is built into, word process, what we used to think about as word processors, and already is in some ways. Do we have some responsibility to sort of model what might be responsible and effective and ethical uses of AI? And two, do we have the sense that AI sort of enhances or undermines, learning, or like the development of some kind of sense of voice, which again, I think writing ought to. So anyway, we felt like as a committee, we could not answer the questions for instructors sort of across campus with respect to all those questions, all those kinds of complexities. But I feel like, and I think the committee feels too, like there are certain kinds of questions that faculty could be asking themselves as they develop some kind of a course or assignment policy on AI. First to my mind is, does the writing practiced in my field involve composing in really sort of fixed and well-established genres, right? The kinds of genres that, in fact, future employers might ask a student to use AI to help them draft, right? A solicitation letter or a press release, right? Are those forms that in some way it might be students might be asked or required to use AI in the future? Oh, my daughter, who's an aspiring journalist, just had an interview with Reuters for an internship, and one of the questions she planned to ask of them was, is AI used in your newsroom in any way? I think we think of journalists as one of the journalism as one of the fields in which AI use is probably like anathema. We want to hear the voice of the journalist. And turned out that was actually one of their questions for them, or one of their questions for her. I think it's on everybody's mind, and I think it's unlikely to imagine that our students will not be asked at some level or be expected to have some kind of familiarity with AI in the workplace. Second, will allowing students to use AI work against developing habits of mind or language skills, especially exploratory kinds of thinking, important to work in my field? I think that's absolutely the case with members of my own department, who in English and literary studies, and in creative writing too, who I think are opposed to sort of all forms, or most of whom are opposed to all forms of uses of AI in student writing. Again, I think that folks in my field, where we're probably in literary studies, at least, where we're not asking students to write sort of totally original readings of stuff, but to refine their ability to pay attention to text. Right. Again, I think that most faculty members in my discipline tend to think of AI as not only unhelpful, but damaging in some ways of students' sort of larger abilities to do the work that they want them to do. I might say the same thing is probably true for colleagues in philosophy, though I have not spoken to them. Okay, again, my sense is that that's probably the case. In other contexts, I think a good deal less so. Third, is it possible for me to encourage specific uses of AI I see as healthy and perhaps manage or limit other uses? Right? Are there ways in which students it might be okay for students to use AI to help them polish a text, or again to brainstorm, or to think through? I've always said I think that many people disagree with me, many people in my own field. But one of the things I think that AI is useful for is to suggest generic conventions. What's writing in this genre look like? I myself find AI relatively good at that. So again, are there ways in which we might encourage students, lead students, to make it use AI into kind of targeted ways? And then fourth, are my students strong enough writers to use AI in those ways, right? Really kind of as an assistant. I struggle with this myself in English 102. And again, I think the first year writing course. And again, I think students' uses of AI are really kind of changing, sort of minute to minute. But it's been my contention in the past, and I think that of many of my colleagues in English 102, that students aren't really skillful enough writers to be able to use AI kind of effectively as a tool. That when AI stuff, it like overwhelms them. They have trouble reading the response, the AI's response, and making sense of it and usefully absorbing it into their language, in their thought patterns. It takes a good deal of rhetorical skill, I think, to do that. So again, I think that's an important question for faculty to be asking themselves as they develop their sense of what's appropriate as a use of AI in their classroom. We also wanted to make some other general recommendations about working with student writers, and then text too, kind of in an age when AI is necessarily on the table. First of all, we would agree and reaffirm the advice of the Modern Language Association and the Conference on College Composition and Communication that we should try to avoid a sort of an adversarial and surveillance kind of sensibility about this. That in some ways we should imagine that we work together with students, and that this shouldn't be about the kind of like gotcha thing, right? But that we look at students' language and think through signs of AI use, and again, whether or not it's appropriate, sort of in a course or on an assignment. I would say similarly that we shouldn't assume that most students want to cheat. Most students, including most studies, including one that we did here on campus in fall of 25, show that they by and large they don't. At least they suggest by and large. I don't mean to suggest that there is no student cheating. As I say, sort of below here, the C's get degrees sensibility, I think is powerful in some ways for students, especially at this moment when they're encouraged to think about college as a financial investment. Like just finish it, get this sort of certification and be done. Again, I don't think that's characteristic of all our students or most of our students. And my advice would be certainly not to assume that's the case. Again, I was astonished by the language in the study that we did that indicated that students really rejected this sense that AI, in many ways, rejected the use of AI altogether, but certainly resented that it interfered in some ways with their learning. Again, I myself was struck by that. Also recognize when students do cheat, copying and pasting a ready-made draft from AI. It's often because they feel like disengaged, or they've missed something, or they don't understand the assignment. Right. So in some ways, the more that we can be involved, I think, in like the drafting process, and it's a tall order, and it's also what people in my field have been saying for ages. That the more that faculty can be involved in the way students develop ideas, again, I think the better that will make students feel like they can, they have the sort of wherewithal in terms of intellectually and in terms of course content to respond, sort of authentically. And again, I think students, generally speaking, do want to do that. I will also say if you think that your assignment might easily be AI'd in ways that you don't approve of, the one fundamental thing I would recommend is try it yourself. I will just before this meeting, in fact, not because I was going to have this conversation, but because it had been on my mind, I just Googled an assignment that I use in my English 271 practical English grammar, in which I ask them to think about some pattern of non-standard language. And being of the age and sort of, I play them a Lyle Lovett song. I could play them something more current, but I would only expose myself as old and ignorant. Anyway, I played this Lyle Lovett song. People may know Memphis is the title of the song. And there's a line in it that says, I'm in love with a woman, what I don't know. And so in the past, I've kind of asked them, and I've had some difficulty with this. I've asked them, don't put this into Google, don't search, don't use any sources. It becomes clear that some number do. And so I have to call them out and have complicated conversations. I've in fact been thinking about changing this assignment and sort of inviting that, but finding other ways to make them have to sort of deal with this description that they get. But the point is to get them to sort of like train their ear to specific constructions in language. So anyway, you can see that had they done this, right, had they heard some non-standard construction, pasted it into Google, right, Gemini would quickly give them at least the basics of a good response. I asked them to give me 3 different sentence examples to just define it grammatically, to say something about who uses it. I would quibble a little bit with, I think this is an Americanism as well as a British. But anyway, long story short, right, they're quickly able to do this. So to take it off the table makes life complicated for me. And also may sort of simply be unrealistic. Anyway, I would recommend that you first try it yourself and then consider some more nuanced approach. As I've said, I may invite this, but ask them to produce some sustained or some extended number of versions of this construction themselves. And to show me that they can wrap their head grammatically around what the language that they get online suggests about the construction. Also, I will say that no assignment is entirely AI proof. I say that I used to hope that could be true. I think is not. But I will say that there are meaningful sort of strategies for making AI response difficult or complicated, including, I'm going to say, building in process steps, really especially important. In-class presentation, or I find, and again, this is harder in some groups than in others, but I find it's really helpful to conference with students before they write. And if you kind of catch them as they're developing ideas and you can sort of intervene in the way that they develop an idea, again, I think that's really, really powerful and prevents them, gives them some reason not to feel like they need to simply type it into ChatGPT and see what they get. I will also say that nesting assignments in class discourse, I think, is really useful. Jaden claimed in class that X, but Tristan argued Y. How did our discussions last week in class last week change your understanding of Z? I'm sorry, that should not be an or there. On the basis of this discussion that we had in class, how'd that change your thinking about this? And then also asking students to reflect on their own developing ideas, maybe even folding in multiple versions of papers. To what extent did your case study of class identity in paper 1 depend on what we have since then seen Veblen call conspicuous consumption? Right? If you try to, I think, layer an idea, new information, and ask them to interrogate ideas that they'd already developed, I think, again, I think that discourages AI and encourages independent thinking. I will also quickly recommend the link here to, I think it's a Carleton College set of assignments. There's a discussion. They say some of the same things about assignments that work to discourage AI use. And this is a good example. I thought there was going to be a physicist here. So I took with the example from physics, which again, I thought was did so not only for that reason, but because I thought it was a really good example too. Um, this is an assignment that ramps up to a journal article or it's a sort of essentially a sourced or research-based essay, but it does a couple of things. First of all, it asks students to really be thinking about the rhetoric. In fact, I guess I should read that whole opening. Asks students to be thinking about these pieces not as sort of quantities of text that get turned over, but as real kind of rhetorical acts that are designed to sort of have some effect on community. This instructor says, let's not kid ourselves. The journal articles you're reading for this class aren't based on original research that you're eager to share, but rather these labs and the lab checkout articles are forced upon you, right? That, they've been assigned in the course. It's not professional to motivate your articles for this class from either of those perspectives, original research or my professor made me do it. That said, there's a reason that each lab was chosen, and some aspect of that novelty should motivate why someone would want to do each lab. You'll have an easier time focusing your thoughts and writing this document if you uncover an authentic motivation for presenting your work to the rest of the scientific community. So it really asks students to start with some sense of, well, why would this matter? And what would it mean to discourse on this topic or to other scientists? It also folds students into some kind of a discussion in class and commits them to some process through which they develop the idea. That said, this guide gives you a handle on minimum expectations for scientific writing in this class. Before writing, I would encourage you to think about prep questions and then have discussions with your lab mates, classmates, and or lab instructors to make sure you have a good foundation, right? That is to think about this issue. Why would other people care about this experiment or this report that I will do? And, sort of have some discussion, refine your sense of that with other people. Again, to whatever extent we can involve students in those processes, I think it's really helpful. I would also suggest to instructors, and this document would on the committee's behalf, to develop your instincts about language that sounds like AI, because there is language that sounds like AI. You can feel it and hear it. Though, don't feel sure that you can always recognize machine generated language. I think that not only will AI get better, but students' ability to absorb it and to play with it will get better too. And remember that it's, I don't know, honestly, and maybe John could speak to this at some point. I don't know where the college stands on this fully. But it's difficult and arguably impossible to absolutely prove that a writer has used AI. Again, I think there's good reason to sort of articulate strong suspicion, but I think it's difficult or impossible to prove. If you do suspect that, I'm sorry, I missed one here. Another thing that really helps with your ability to identify AI language, of course, is knowing your students work well. Again, much easier in a group of 22 or 15 or 22 than in a group of 75 or more. In large groups, it's hard to know your students well individually and remember previous work. But again, it's really helpful. Also, again, I've said it's easy to hear language that makes you suspicious. If that's the case, right, have some conversation with the student. Tell them what you're thinking, show them why, right? It's my experience, not all the time, but my experience is that when you do that, and it's in some ways labor intensive, I understand. But when you do that, students typically, or very often at least, will say, typically, I'm going to say, will say, yeah, you're right. That I have used AI here, or I kind of used it a little, and you can worry aloud about the degree to which, in the manner in which AI was used, if it seems worrisome to you. So again, I would totally recommend a conversation. Remember that policy may well vary. You can declare, and it's probably healthy to declare policies on AI, not just for a course, but on individual assignments too. Okay, in the example that I just gave you from my own English 271, if that's the case, I will ask them not to use AI on some other pieces, or not to use AI or to do research on some other pieces. But in the that journal of observed non-standard usages, right, I might open it to that. So again, be aware and remember that you can do that. Also recognize, in different forms, generative AI is a relatively new thing, but AI grammar check and spell check functions, have been around. They're a form of AI, and they've been around, of course, for like years and years and years. We've worried about them in certain ways, though that horse has left the barn. It's impossible to sort of like totally police that. In fact, I hear lots of writing instructors say they just wish that students would really pay attention to grammar check, which is like a total 180 from what used to be the case. So anyway, recognize that what we think of as generative AI may be some version of that same sort of thing. It may work sort of kind of in a similar way. Consider that catching students may ultimately be less effective than like convincing them that the kind of work you're asking them to do is worth it. In some ways, maybe this becomes a conversation about the value of doing this work in the ways that you've recommended it. Also, totally would recommend find out what disciplinary colleagues are doing. That was one of the main things that the writing fellows and I were suggesting as we, or trying to make happen as we went from college to college. That first year that ChatGPT came out, I think people just really did not have a sense kind of what other people in their field were doing. And then also have conversations with students. I know that John recommends, my sense is at least, John, that you recommend this highly. Consider developing some sort of classroom agreement on how AI should be used. I will say I have not done that myself. I find it difficult to manage in some way logistically, but I've heard good things from people who have done that. The one other thing that I will note in this document, and then I'll be quiet and look for encourage some response and some discussion. We also wanted to discourage faculty profoundly, and this is, if this seems astonishing or appalling, or it is a thing. We wanted to discourage faculty from using AI to read or grade student work. Lots of you can go online and get for like $19 a month CoGrader, or you can there are websites that will promise to read all your students' work and do a great job, in minutes. We think, as the SUNY Council on Writing, a group across the SUNY system I work with, does too. We think that that's a really, really bad model for higher education, regardless of discipline. That the way I think about it is that any SUNY student ought to be guaranteed that their ideas, if they've spent time thinking about developing some text around a set of ideas, that there ought to be some like expert in the field who spends some time reading and sort of responding in a human way. So anyway, that's the document. I wonder if people have general thoughts or responses. Again, I will say these are the questions that were sort of like on the table kind of for me, but thoughts or questions? What do you guys think? Is this a useful kind of a thing to do to produce a document like this? Are there other ways that we should imagine folding out the same ideas? Do the ideas seem to make sense to you? Are there things that you've in practice in your work, in your classes, or work with students, that would make this, you think, not work well, or make you sort of question some of this? Are there things that we should add? Anybody?
I guess I'll get the ball rolling. Um, I really liked the framework that you put together, Mike, especially because in these first 2 years after ChatGPT came out, it has been interesting to see the evolution of the students' thoughts. And after that survey we did, that was interesting as well. But I think that in this upcoming semester, I'm trying to take a lot of what you've put into the document and put it into class because I had a few instances of obvious rampant cheating. Even though I agree with you that most students don't want to cheat, I think that it's a matter of expanding upon some of the experiments I've done in class where I help them use the ChatGPT to brainstorm or to take advantage of the fact that ChatGPT knows a whole bunch of stuff that students can't possibly know because they're first year college students, which I get. So I guess it's kind of what you talked about with future employment, helping them to understand productive and ethical ways of using it in college writing, but also for their future. Just one example, didn't someone talked about how they heard about a teacher using ChatGPT to write recommendation letters, which I found I don't know. I don't know if that. Yeah, you're shaking your head, Lynn. I agree. I don't know. It's not very personal, I guess. But that's a very rambling way to hopefully get someone else to contribute and continue.
I've heard that too, Ken, about reference letters. Yeah, Lynn?
So to piggyback on what Ken said, one of the issues we talked about in the WAC committee meetings was about, as Ken mentioned, ethical issues with ChatGPT and AI, and um, the fact that students are entering into these AI programs our assignments, which belong to us. And then what does AI do with it? What does ChatGPT do with it? And I don't think they recognize that intellectual property doesn't belong to them, to the students. It belongs to us, the faculty. And that's a concern. And I don't know, I've mentioned this in class to students, but in a generation of students where they freely give all kinds of stuff online and share all kinds of stuff online, maybe that makes less of an impact. But I think it is worth mentioning that if they put something into ChatGPT, then who knows what's actually going to happen to that information? Where's it going? Who's using it? How are they churning it out and using it with other people? So that might be a good, I don't know if it's worthy to mention in the document per se, but it is worth chatting about in class about the ethical and intellectual property issues, which concerns me a lot.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing we did. I don't think that we included that. We talked about intellectual property issues in the section of the separate document really that would be for students, but I don't think that we made that point. And I don't think Lynn, I don't think I've heard anybody phrase it like that. That is, I could imagine saying to students, please don't recognize that this assignment prompt is my intellectual property. Please don't share it. I think we could ask students to do that. That's interesting.
The parallel I have for that, Lynn, is like it's perfectly legal to stand out on the sidewalk and take someone's picture and put it online, but it's also really crummy to do. I didn't ask for your permission to put your like so it's legal, but it's also crummy.
Yeah, and the same type of sentiment comes down to student writing too. I mean, we have our own intellectual property when it comes to our prompts and things of that nature. But I try to reinforce to students that when you put something, like say they're like, oh, I just use it to help me edit. I do tell them when you plug something into these models, they're taking the things that your brain has come up with naturally and also use it to feed the larger AI mechanism that is these LLMs. So that's another consideration for ethics on the opposite side of the desk, I guess.
Yeah. John, do you have any sense of this discussion? Like, is this something that has come up?
It's it's a difficult trade-off because we do want to prepare students for a world where they will be using AI tools in pretty much anything they're doing right now, but we do want them to develop skills. So, you have to come up with whatever is appropriate in your discipline to develop the skills that are essential. And that might very well vary. And certainly the ethical issues of copyright and so forth are really important. To some extent, that's mitigated a little bit when they use the campus license system of Gemini, because then it's not being used for training purposes and it stays local, but it's still your intellectual property when they upload things you've created to it.
Yes. Have you heard about faculty members doing that? Sort of specifically asking students not to share what amounts to their intellectual property.
Yes, mostly people who just say, that the use of AI is banned. And generally, those types of prohibitions are ignored by students because they don't see it as being realistic, So, um, and that's why conversations with students can be really helpful in coming up with a class AI policy that students buy into, can be helpful in getting them to think about these issues, or at least have some discussions of those with students, because if they don't buy into the values that you're expressing, they're not probably going to practice them put them into practice.
Right. Thank you.
But if you emphasize the importance of developing good skills, and note that AI makes mistakes, and it's probably really important to respond to, or to be able to analyze the output effectively. And that requires that you develop your own critical thinking skills, which is developed through writing and so forth. And emphasizing that aspect of it can be helpful.
Right. Thank you. Ken, it looks like you have a question for Matt. Is that okay, Matt?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I suppose Lynn as well. I'm curious. It's kind of the same in 102, but different because you're teaching different classes. When students use AI as a research, I'm wondering what you're seeing and what you tell them in terms of how to stop or when to stop with ChatGPT. Like if you're trying to figure out the homicide rate in Chicago in 1995, like I can see going to ChatGPT for help, and then you go to whatever official agency has actually calculated that. But do students simply stop at the ChatGPT research, which is obviously sometimes incorrect? And same thing with history. I'm guessing it's also incorrect. I'm curious as to what you're thinking about how students use it as a search engine.
So whether it be senior seminar or another class, I do really focus on doing what you just said, which is kind of treating AI as a super search engine and something that doesn't just get them to information, but I think in the transition from Google search to AI is the synthesis of information. And so students or faculty are having an exponential amount of time saved in terms of the information that we have to now sift through and synthesize. But that doesn't mean that it's verified information. So I can't stop students from using AI, even if I don't want them to. So I have kind of doubled and tripled down on having them cite both in text and via a references page. We do exercises in class, not dissimilar to some of the things that you've done for me in senior seminar as a writing fellow, which is, I think the trade-off is that AI saves us time and synthesizes information, but because it can hallucinate citations, we then have to be much more diligent about verifying where the information it gives us comes from.
I just want to jump in and say those hallucinations are a lot less common today. And also, if they're using the thinking versions of ChatGPT or Gemini or most others, it will link to a citation right at the end of each point that it provides. And if it's not doing that, they can always ask it to, and they can ask it to verify that that citation exists and ask for web links. So it's pretty easy to incorporate that.
But as a follow-up, the citations that ChatGPT or any other AI mechanism gives us maybe aren't ones that are, say, relevant to the class or relevant to a discipline, for example. And so in some cases, it's not that the source that it gives is irrelevant or a hallucination or even illegitimate, but it may not be, it could be a government agency website, could be a news source, not a journal article. Could be a journal article that's over 10 years old, things of that nature. So I really use ChatGPT as a way, or any AI that students are using as a way to really engage them about information literacy.
I,
John, did you say?
One
Oh,
other
I'm
point is
sorry.
that there are AI browsers now that basically replace Chrome. Both ChatGPT and Perplexity have them, so that the AI is built right into the browser as well.
Wow. I did not know that.
yeah. Well, and remember too that when we're talking about any discipline, facts are not the same as interpretation. And so I had a student last semester use AI for he called it brainstorming. I called it summary. Um, he thought he was brainstorming. I thought he was summarizing, right? So he took a primary document and he summarized it. The AI summarized it for him. But the problem was that it didn't summarize the document according to the project that he was working on. So he had, the summary didn't really address the issues he was thinking about in his paper. So I always encourage students to say, summaries, there's a difference between summary and interpretation, right? And interpretation means, taking little that little tiny bit of information and going, oh, that's really interesting. What's going on there? Which a summary by AI may not pick up because it's not relevant. That particular piece of information is not relevant to your project. So,
There's that
That can
rhetorical.
easily be done though by just putting that into the prompt or using appropriate queries. So AI can do that pretty well.
Can do which part?
Can do some analysis and find the parts of primary documents that are relevant. So
right, but not according to the documents we've already read in class. Right? So
um,
I think there's
uh,
always a limitation.
that would be nice to think,
Yeah,
but I'm not so sure that's true unless it's not available to the AI platform in some way. So
right. Well,
if you have
yeah.
documents that are not accessible to AI or in its training database, then that is true.
Right. A lot of documents I use for medieval history are not online. And so they have to read them. They can't just pick them up offline. Yeah.
I wanted to say, Lynn, that your sense of the student's inability to negotiate the kind of slippery slope between no, it wasn't analysis, summary and interpretation is a good example of sort of what I was suggesting about students' inability, unless they're pretty good writers. It's hard for them to use AI truly as an assistant. And maybe one of the things we'll need to struggle with in the future.
And that brings up a good point is that how, if you're using AI, I think there can be appropriate uses, but how do you know that what AI is giving you is what you want unless you know how to interpret that stuff for yourself in the first place, right? Um, how are you supposed to evaluate the validity and the expertise of AI if you don't really have the first clue what it's telling you, right? And that's the issue, especially for first year students, I think.
Yes.
That's exactly what I'm thinking right now, Lynn, because I'm trying to figure out the murder rate in Chicago in 1995, like I said earlier, and because I've been around and learned, I know which documents to understand to use and which agencies and which things are better, but students, they're freshmen, so they don't have that experience, and that's okay.
Great. I've got a question for John about something that he said, but I also just wanted to ask, generally speaking, are other thoughts about this as a document, other things that we should include? Is a document like this helpful? It did feel to us like there was this great vacuum of advice, guidance kind of about how to work with writers, at this sort of complicated moment. Um,
I think the most important thing is, like John said, the buy-in of students and, working on their critical thinking skills and improving their skill sets. Other than that, I mean, as long as we have grading at stake, and everyone using AI, even, the instructors, people who give speeches, everyone uses AI in all sorts of areas. And I've been attending to these workshops, and it's amazing to see how much AI can do and how you can get away with doing your work and not being too obvious. There are so many different ways, and right now, so many resources. So I think the most important thing, like you said, Mike, meeting with the students, that's what I'm going to be, doing a lot, meeting with them, going through the process, even before, writing their drafts to make sure their ideas are, valuable, and they should be, focusing on those skill sets, even, as a first year student and after graduating at the workspace. So I think those, if we mention on those and encourage them that they can do it, they don't really need AI, is effective.
Great. Thanks, April. Okay. My other question for you, John, was just, did you say that chat, because I didn't know this, that Chat GPT, you can ask Chat GPT like Gemini, for its to link its sources?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't
And
recognize
if you do the thinking mode, it will often do that automatically. But if not, it will just put notes at the end that you click on and will take you right to the sources.
that's really really helpful. Again, good to know, and I think it's a helpful sort of a resource for users of ChatGPT. That, of course, means that we're back in the same, which is probably a better place than just sort of a students accepting or readers accepting what they get from AI in whole cloth. But it puts us back in the position of having to think through the value, as you say, Ken, of a given source or agency or whatever. That it puts us back into having to think about digital literacy, kind of in a fundamental way, information literacy.
And ultimately critical thinking, that we want students to develop those skills. And if they do a lot of cognitive offloading to AI, they're not developing those skills. And emphasizing that to students might be helpful, saying the reason we're asking you to do that at this stage without using AI is because you're developing skills that will allow you to use AI more effectively in the future, so that you're not just accepting whatever the machine happens to give you with all the biases and other things that are built into it.
All right. I would also add to that, and I was struck by what Abru said about students learning, is that I think they also need to be told that their thoughts have value, right? That what they're talking about is meaningful and their lives have meaning, and they need to develop skills to talk about themselves and what's meaningful for them. I work with students writing, statements for graduate school, and they have a hard time figuring out what it is they've done in their lives that is meaningful and why they want to go onto a grad program or a fellowship. And I'm like, you have value. Your ideas have value. You are an individual. You need to speak and you need to write and you need to communicate in a way that reflects who you are. And AI, I think, in some ways takes away from that. And I think that more positive idea about developing your own voice, as we've talked about a lot in our WAC committee meetings, is like developing your own voice, sharing who you are in an authentic way might be one of the best ways to encourage students to work at this, right? To develop their own ideas.
And from a more materialistic perspective, just telling students that if all they're able to do is write prompts, it doesn't require a college degree to do that. So they need to develop some skills beyond that if they're going to be employable when they leave here.
I was going to say too, Lynn, that there seems to me a direct relationship between that issue and all those graphs you see about like happiness and where it's going, especially at the level of Gen Z. Yes, I think that kind of pep talk can be really useful on any number of counts. So I think we're out of time. Is that right, John?
Yeah, we're pretty much at the end, but good discussion. One thing I did want to suggest though is if the document doesn't include something like a discussion of the pair process, that they've been working on in the California system, and Anna Mills has been one of the big advocates of that, it might be worth mentioning that as a way of using AI in a way where they're still developing skills, but interacting with AI in a more productive manner.
Yes. I will confess, John, that I have mixed feelings about asking building it in as what will be perceived as a required stage for
No,
students.
but mentioning it as an option that faculty may want to consider
Yeah.
might not be bad because it is being adopted at lots of places, including many places in SUNY.
Yes. Yeah, what John's referring to, people don't know, is a process where there's some kind of peer revision stage and then also an AI revision stage. What I think people often forget, John, I think Anna Mills too, and I know you totally have a sense of this, a better sense than I do, but it also recommends the building of chatbots, particular bots from not only a disciplinary perspective, but the perspective of a given course, kind of what a document should do, which I remember that workshop with her. I was astonished to find is remarkably easy, just in sort of natural language to describe what you want this document to look like. Simpler than building an old-fashioned heuristic or a rubric to my mind. But so. So anyway, thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate the help with this. If you have any other thoughts, let Ken or Amanda or Lynn or me know. Anybody else on the Writing Across Curriculum Committee. Again, we appreciate it. Wherever you are, I hope if it's snowing, they're measuring it in inches and not feet. It's the case for me here in Syracuse. And again, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Important discussions.